Bruce DuMont back in hour number 2 of Beyond the Beltway. Thanks very much for joining us. 1-800-723-8289. Jeannie Ives and Rush Darwish join us in studio at WYND in Chicago for our Beyond the Beltway broadcast this evening. And we now join us via Zoom, or joined by Zoom, by Reverend Keith Draper. He is in the Chicagoland area, and he is with World Relief. He heads the Chicagoland effort, and he is part of the huge apparatus that is trying to deal with the issue of refugees in Afghanistan. And Reverend Draper, thank you for joining us on Beyond the Beltway this evening.
Thanks for having me on, Bruce.
I'd like to begin by asking some really basic questions, and I know my guests in studio want to join me in this interview, and that is, what is the current communication between your organization and the State Department, the Defense Department, or who do you deal with at government to deal with some of the refugees issues that we're dealing with as a nation?
It's actually an interagency work that we connect with. We meet with the State Department about people who have completed vetting and screening to come to this country, but they've been through multi-agency vetting with Homeland Security and with State Department, other agencies, FBI, trying to work through, are these people able to come to our country? Do they meet the qualifications? So all of that's involved, but even before then, the United Nations has a part in the designation of someone as a refugee or special status, and then they're part of that interview screening that happens with them before there are even countries that are involved, like the United States.
So when you meet a refugee, they have already gone through several layers of vetting, and you know that the name on the list that you're working on is someone that is a bona fide refugee ready to come to the United States?
Yes, that process can take 24 to 36 months on average. Wow. For a refugee to come to this country. What's also interesting as we're thinking about this now is every year the president makes the presidential determination of how many people will come, and also there are set amounts from certain regions, and so with the level at 62,500 and certain regions already filled in terms of what could be offered, we're probably only talking about 4,000 positions open in the refugee status, at least until October 1, when the new calendar would begin for the government.
And at this point, then, anything over 4,000 refugees, they would not be brought into the United States. They would be brought into other countries that are receptible to them?
For refugees,
right.
We certainly are seeing displaced people in some unique ways right now in Afghanistan that really challenge all of us to step up and do what we can to help. Since 2009, there's been the special immigrant visa that's been made available to people who served our troops that were in Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. And so that's some of who we're working through right now, are those people who have been evacuated that already had been through screenings because they served our government and our troops. So they had special status already, but there's further processing that takes place for them. And those are some of the people that we're already beginning to receive right now. So just drawing that distinction there between a refugee, as we would normally work through them, and special immigrant visas of people who are arriving here in a very unique situation.
For those who are watching these horrible pictures on television about people literally, risking their lives to get out of Afghanistan, how does the average person, or my question to you is, how do you deal with that population of people versus people from Haiti that may be seeking refugees status, people from Central America that might be seeking status? I mean, it's this huge number of people. How do you go about determining who is likely to get in and who is not, and how do you create your priority list?
Yeah, I would say we're not really a part of making those decisions. The United Nations determines if someone's a refugee, and certainly with special immigrant visas or these kinds of unique circumstances, those are happening within governmental realms. Really, our role is to be willing to say yes, and there are 9 agencies that the U.S. government contracts with. We're one of those 9 that says, once you've completed those processes for people to come, we're ready to help. And what we've been doing now is really rebuilding. But we have a long history of this work. We've been at this for over 40 years. And with that 40 years, over half of those years are working with Afghanis. So 20 years of relationship, probably at least 500 that we've resettled here through the years, over the past 20 years, into Chicagoland. We have 16 offices across the United States, so we have people, probably our largest concentration in Sacramento, but we've had Seattle, Portland on. We've had people in those settings as well. So we really resettle people really all over the United States, and I represent the Chicago office,
Who are you looking for? What type of person are you looking for to say, yes, I want to welcome a refugee to my home?
Probably the biggest thing that we're looking at when someone comes to this country is where are their family ties? Like, do they have any tie to the country? Because those are part of the support that they're going to need for their adjustments. In addition to that, though, where do we have populations of people where the language could be help them within that adjustment? So as we look at people groups, we're looking at over 750 that would be resettled currently on the docket for us. And those are from all over the world, in addition to what we're seeing right now with Afghanistan. So in all of those settings, we're really looking at what kinds of ties are in place already and what language skills are in place. And then we basically provide those supports. So if you would think about someone who's been forcibly displaced, what do they need to start life over? And we do that with a big community of support, the support of community partners, the support of churches, the support of multi-faith organizations, other faiths that have helped and supported our work, and then individuals who give to support what we do.
Are there geographic locations in the United States right now that are more likely to be able to accept an Afghan refugee than others? You mentioned Sacramento and Spokane and a few other places. You have offices there, but are those regions of the country that maybe have more people that speak the language?
Yeah, certainly when there's more commonality to that area, that's certainly going to be a consideration. I think one of the other things that plays in here, though, is certainly what is the capacity of the organization or organizations that are working to do that. Most of those areas that we work with, there are multiple agencies that are working there. As I mentioned, there are 9 agencies that do this work. So we're one of the 9 in that effort. So the State Department really meets with us to try to make those decisions about where people are going to be placed. And as I've said, our responsibility is to be able to say yes and help where we can.
Reverend Draper,
and we do have to, with a big family to support.
We do have to pause right now. When we come back, Jeannie Ives and Rush Darwish, they have questions for you as well as our phone callers. I'm Bruce DuMont. Don't go away. Bruce DuMont back. We continue with Beyond the Beltway. And Jeannie Ives, you have some questions for Reverend Draper.
Hey, nice to speak with you, Reverend Draper. I've got a good family friend who has an SIV immigrant visa, and I think there's a little bit of a disconnect here. So you can be a refugee, and then you can have one of these visas, which means you're sort of a refugee, but you have special status because there's a sort of metrics that you have to pass through. 2 years minimum service typically with the Americans. You have to have approval from the chief of the mission. You've got to have all this vetting done to you. It's different than your typical refugee, even though your refugee process does usually take 2 years. Isn't that correct?
That's correct. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's why I wanted to just draw that distinction, because we've been talking a lot about people who are being evacuated. And I think really this first wave of what we see being evacuated right now are many of those in that special immigrant visa status. I think, just want to mention too that coming into this role, I really come at this not really from a political background, but really as a minister of 35 years in the Chicagoland area, seeing families who were displaced and trying to help them start life again. So really, I come at this strictly from a humanitarian perspective. Um, and so I feel like when Rush mentioned that he's the rookie of this group, I think the honeymoon's over, and I'm actually the newest rookie
Yes, you are.
in this conversation. So appreciate you guys helping me ease into this.
How do you
Well,
respond to those that say they look at these pictures and they say, this is horrible. This hurricane, we're going to see stories of people, out of their homes in the hurricanes, and we're going to read about Haiti. We're going to see all these pictures, but when is enough for the United States? When do we just say, listen, we can't take all the people of the world that may want to come here, even though their thoughts and the reasons for coming here are valid? What's the response to that, Minister?
Well, certainly, as a minister, I think we'd want to help any way we can with as many as we can. But I think we have a unique situation that we're dealing with in Afghanistan. We actually have an office in Haiti, and we have boots on the ground there working with, I think, around 20 agencies that are trying to serve that setting right now. But in this case, we're really talking about people that served our country, that are allies of us. And that's a very unique situation that I think we're trying to deal with, very credible threat of their life and survival for them. But we certainly understand, there are a lot of needs around the world right now. And so where do we prioritize? And for us, we are a longstanding refugee agency, and that's a contract we have with the government. But we're very committed to doing that work. And yet World Relief is an organization that is around 25 countries of the world and 16 offices here in the U.S.
well, you bring
So
up a
we do step into these other things as needed.
So, Reverend Draper, you bring up a good point.
I'm sorry?
You bring up a good point here. There are usually the vetting for the refugees is done at a refugee camp, and that is typically overseas. And my understanding is they don't always get to choose where they're going to be able to be placed. An SIV refugee, however, has almost like their golden ticket to the U.S. if they want to pull the ticket and do it. They don't always have to do it. But that said, it appears to be, having piled many folks onto these cargo planes and brought them over, we're essentially setting up refugee camps prior to vetting them here in the United States. I think this is unique and unusual. And again, you have no say at all in how they're vetted. You're just given a list of refugees that have qualified, and then you place them.
Is that what's happening at the military bases? Some of the people that are going to the U.S. military bases, Fort Hood being one, and Camp Riley up in Wisconsin, that these are people that
Are not fully vetted?
they're not fully vetted?
Well, I don't see how you could unless they actually have an SIV form themselves, a Chief of Mission Approval, or the golden ticket also is a DOD badge, which is very, very helpful to them getting immediate access to this type of thing. But as my Iraqi friend said, there were lots and lots of false claims of having worked with the Americans when they in fact did not.
Russia's got a question for you, Reverend.
Reverend Draper, you and I could definitely have a conversation of who's the bigger rookie. Trust me, I will win that battle. I'll be honest with you. After my congressional run, Donald Trump did inspire me. He inspired me to start an organization that works with refugees, and one of the reasons is because I guess I would label them Donald Trump and Republicans who support Donald Trump fully created a narrative that refugees. They bunch them in with people who are trying to come into the border illegally. Criticize refugees almost in a sense that they're being racist, that they're coming into this country and taking over. How do you handle that narrative in your agency?
There's definitely a segment of population that has concerns, and that's why I think it's important for us to be clear about vetting with them. But when I think about areas where we're impacting other parts of society, it's interesting to me to see how much of a coalition we find of support. Our employment team works with helping people find those initial jobs and even upgrading the jobs and moving more into their career background. And right now we have great demand from businesses that would like to employ the people that we are bringing. So we do have segments of society that are very anxious to have us come. We have good reputation over these years of working with, apartment owners who say, hey, the folks that you work with do pay their rent. They are people who are responsible. They aren't the ones that are creating the trouble in our apartment complexes. And those are people that we build relationships with and have over these 40 years now. So I do think there is a challenge in it. I think one of the reasons that we as an organization really work with faith-based communities, and particularly the churches that partner with us, is that builds a measure of trust. Those are people who do come from conservative backgrounds in many of those cases, and yet really want to help people who have been displaced because that's part of what their faith teaches.
Well, we have that in our situation. I'm from Wheaton, right in your area. Very familiar with World Relief. They are very much a presence in our community, and my particular church has a huge Burmese refugee population. I'd like to also point out. I'm sure you're familiar with Farah Almedi and her story and the memoir that she published, The Other Side of the Sky, about her time in Afghan. So, and she's a Wheaton North graduate. So we're very much used to this in our area, and I think that is missed by a lot of people on the left in this state, particularly, that they don't understand how integrated they really are in at least where I'm from.
There also doesn't seem to be.
We've seen really broad bipartisan support for our work, which has been great through these years. Under Democrat and Republican, we've seen great support for what we do, and we're committed to keeping those relationships and have worked, across the aisle on all these issues.
Here's a question, and this may sound like a very simplistic response, but this is one thing that I have always thought about, because you mentioned that you want to bring large groups to the United States. You want them to at least be able to integrate and get along with each other. They have to eventually, hopefully, assimilate into the American population. But initially, they've got to be able to understand their neighbors. They have to this dramatic cultural shock between coming from the hills of Afghanistan into an urban area like Sacramento, California. But I'm wondering, since at least the perception is that many of them are coming from agricultural, rural, geographically diverse backgrounds in Afghanistan. At least that's the perception that I think people have of many refugees. I'm wondering if a state like Montana, a state that has a lot of room, that a state like Montana, with obviously a lot of federal help and a lot of coordination and a lot of social services built into it, whether or not there would be an area in a state like Montana to take in 40 or 50,000. I mean, it would probably be the largest city in Montana, certainly at that number. But I'm wondering whether that becomes almost an incubator of how you might be able to bring large numbers of people to the United States where they all know the language, and then you have outside tutors, part of a long-term federal government program that tries to then assimilate them into the American way of life, and you tie into that businesses and the commercial people who are looking for workers who are reliable, and again you set those businesses up in a place like Montana. Is that Pollyanna thinking on my part, Reverend?
I would say it sounds like you ought to start a resettlement agency, Bruce. I mean,
okay.
That's certainly what we do, and we do that all over the country. Some of those are more rural areas, some are more city. For us, one of those key factors is really, do we have the support to do the work in the setting, and do we have the services that are necessary? So you've hit on several of those cylinders that are really important for resettlement work to take place.
Yeah.
we wouldn't do the work that we do if we didn't have really a great community of volunteers from churches and community partners who volunteer their time and energy. If we didn't have the support, donor support of those churches and individuals, the school districts here, I can't tell you how many
School
different
districts.
churches that I'm in.
I want to come
where
back
I
and
see the
I want
schools,
to talk. I want
helping
to talk
so much.
I want to talk about that, and also I want to talk about just the, as you say, a lot of people want to help, but then they'll say, well, not in my backyard. And I'm just saying is that given the political politics and background of Montana, maybe they would say yes. Back shortly. Bruce DuMont back, and the idea of beginning a career in resettlement of refugees, I don't think at my age is going to likely happen. So maybe we put that under Pollyanna thinking, Reverend. But again, it would also get back to what a lot of people in this country feel, and they would like to help, but it's not in my neighborhood. They don't want to do it for themselves. And again, you've got and again, you have a unique situation here. Is you have a language. Obviously, the interpreters may know English, but their native languages are not. It's not like Spanish and German. I mean, these are very unique, hard to understand and learn languages. And again, you're not likely to find them, on a public train in Spokane or Seattle, Washington, where there's also one of your offices I know is out in Spokane, Washington. Johnny from El Paso, Texas, has joined the conversation this evening. Johnny, go ahead. You're on Beyond the Beltway.
Yes, good afternoon. I wanted to pigtail on something you said a little while ago about the different situations we have going on here in our country. The Louisiana storm that's impending, also the Haitian people that's having problems. But also, I'm looking at what's going on here in our own country. We got the people facing eviction, and I'm hearing that the people from Afghanistan helped us. So that's all good too. But we got veterans. So anywhere from 10 to 20 years is facing eviction out of their houses. Now, we serve our country more than our own U.S. citizen veterans. So I wish our government, I know the gentleman you have the desk is not part of that situation, but I just think that our government needs to prioritize things, take care of home first, and then worry about helping the rest of the world. One other thing, we got the people coming down here in El Paso right now from Afghanistan. Now, I was looking at one of the people on TV today was trying to figure out, they're trying to support them, but they're already talking about the dress they're going to be giving them. They can't give them anything but pants and jeans and stuff because the women understand that they wear skirts and stuff like that. But anyway, that's enough said. So
Johnny, stay on the line. You have an interesting perspective. Stay on the line. I want Reverend Draper to sort of address that, but I think it's something you're not alone in your thoughts on this, and I thank you for calling. But go ahead, Reverend. Your reaction to that.
Johnny, I really appreciate your calling in on this because I am the son of a veteran and really know the perspectives of my family in this and the challenges that were there. I think when you think about refugee population, sometimes or even people that have served our military, that there's some disconnect there. And what I've really seen is that veterans very much support what we're doing. They care about the people that served them, that helped in translation, that worked alongside them, and they feel like we should be offering them the support that we promised to help them, that if they put themselves in harm's way to help our troops, that we should be trying to help them in this time. If we say we're going to do that, let our yes be yes and our no be no. But I think, the veterans certainly have been supportive in large measure of helping people who've assisted our troops. I think that veterans don't get enough support, don't get enough care, and completely agree with the need to support our veterans. And I especially feel as we think about the losses of what has happened in Afghanistan, read those stories today of the 13 people who died over there. And so I feel like we need to think about all of those that are involved here and how do we support and care for people. As a minister, that's definitely my perspective. World Relief's position is to help those who are in hard places and in many places around the world we're not just working with refugee populations. We're working with people who don't have sufficient food or medical care or needs for women and children within countries. So we definitely work in a broader way. But the veteran needs, I agree, are great. And I appreciate how much they've gotten behind what we're looking at doing here with Afghanistan.
Yeah, some of the you're involved, Jeannie. Johnny, thank you very much for your call. I really do appreciate it. And I think the one thing that I think we're likely to see is there's going to be this fight for the heart and the sympathy of the American voter or the American citizen, because on one hand, maybe they want to bend over backwards to help the Afghanis because they were helping the United States. So there's a special commitment that many feel that they would have with this family.
We have a long history of this, though, Bruce.
Right, but again, they, on the other hand, if it's someone who's sneaking into the country from Honduras or Guatemala because they're running against the tyrants in their in their country, somehow they're sneaking into the country, whereas the people from Afghanistan are coming in with SIV passports.
But they're not all coming in with SIV passports. No. It doesn't feel that way at all. We don't.
But you say that's like a gold standard.
That's the gold standard, but it doesn't appear that everybody who we've already taken out, 110,000 folks, all have that.
But
gold
they're viewed.
standard.
My point is that they're viewed differently.
Yes, 100% they're viewed differently. But we've always been a generous nation. Remember the number of refugees that we took in from the Vietnam era as well.
Right.
So
And
we've
Cuba.
always been a generous nation. We don't. Unless you're Joe Biden and you tell the Cubans that they need to go back, which he did just recently. That when they were fleeing that country. So I mean, you've got different administrations.
Are we really, Jeannie? Are we really going to bring up anything about Joe Biden comparing to Donald Trump, who called people crossing rapists, killers,
and
so on and so forth?
He was not incorrect about that. There's MS-13 infiltrating the southern border all the time.
There might be, but they're the small minority versus the people that are escaping persecution.
And back to Afghanistan.
So I still don't want them in the country either. So there you go.
But again, going back, I mean, the veterans that have formed some of these groups to get their former buddies and interpreters out, you're involved with one of the groups, or your sons
my
are?
sons told me about this group, and so I joined. I haven't done anything with them yet, but it's called Allied Airlift 21, and it started out really by a group of West Pointers who wanted to get their Afghani classmates out. And so they have figured out a way to upload the documents and verify who they are, and they found people that will vet them in the United States and go through those documents. And then they set them up with somebody who is over in Afghanistan right now, giving them safe passage routes to get to the airport. Of course, all that is being shut down now. Now they're looking at safe passage over land. How do you do it that way instead, which is a very treacherous journey, as you can well imagine, given the terrain of Afghanistan. So, but this is something the veterans started. Of course, we know that the veterans have already, Special Forces have secretly rescued hundreds of members of the Afghanistan Special Forces. These are people that they made a personal promise to, that we will be there to help you out when we are in need. These are the first people we need to get out. These are the people Joe Biden is at risk of leaving behind by his hurried evacuation, and it's just dreadful.
Since we know that the United States has
let me say into that, Bruce,
go ahead
for a minute too.
Go
I
ahead.
think we have certainly been an advocate for those evacuations happening back months ago, and we don't like the fact that we're put in the position that we're in with this right now. But we've wanted to see this happen for many months, and we've been rebuilding our resettlement efforts, our work with helping people who are displaced start over. And we've also been an advocate for other locations for them to go temporarily. Guam has been one of those places that we've talked about as a place where people could be processed. I think because of this being as it is, last moment, feeling like it's last moment, we've really had to bring people to military bases to try to do some of this work that, quite honestly, could have been done in a more steadied way in other places earlier in time. But this is where we are, and we can't really, as you mentioned earlier in the earlier hour, We can't really look back at history on it. We've got to figure out what we're going to do now,
Was
and we're committed to being here now for them.
Reverend, was the process you're describing that you wanted to happen months ago? Was it slowed down by the Defense Department, the State Department, some other department that you deal with, or is it a collective government slowness to react to situations on the ground?
It's an enigma. I have no idea. I wish I could tell you why, but I think because it was not dealt with months ago, that's why we're in the situation we're in right now. And so we have advocated for it for quite a time, but I don't know why there's been delays.
Rush?
There's no doubt we have to talk about what happened and what is happening right now in Kabul. No ifs, ands, or buts. But to go back to the refugees and what to do with them, all I could say is the area I'm from the southwest suburbs of Chicago, you have a large pocket of Syrian refugees, Palestinian, and Yemenis. And one thing I will tell you, they will open up your eyes and open up your heart in terms of why they are here and what they want to accomplish. We, a couple years ago, the Arab American Business and Professional Association, we participated in a job fair. And when you hear their stories and they're coming up to you, a lot of them were doctors, engineers, lawyers. But when they came to your booth looking for work, they didn't say, hey, where could I be a doctor? Where could I be a lawyer?
Yeah.
No, they said, put me to work. What opportunity? Is there a restaurant that's hiring? And I know that there's a lot of people who feel like they don't want to welcome refugees, but the reality is most refugees who come to the United States, they know where they're at. You know, a lot of them want to learn English, and a lot of them want work to support their family. They come to this country with nothing. So
on that, I completely agree with
Yeah.
you. The Iraqi gentleman that we know, and they saved an American soldier, so they got and then they started to work with the American military. His wife is a doctor. He's an engineer. Had multiple companies in Iraq. Very successful, and they just want to come here for American freedom. And he is set to get his citizenship next Wednesday, and so we're happy about that.
Okay. When we come back, we'll talk more. We've got only one segment left, and I have some advice for conservatives. If you're a conservative listening to this broadcast this evening, I have a very specific political suggestion for you. Don't go away. Bruce DuMont back will be to joy listening to us in Spokane, Washington. But I said before the break, if you are a conservative, you may want to listen to what I have to say. Obviously, there's a lot of conservatives in this country that are very upset about politically what's happening. It might be related to Donald Trump. It may not be related to Donald Trump. It could be exacerbated by your feelings based on President Biden's handling of what's happening in Afghanistan. You may not like Speaker Pelosi. Whatever it is, you are absolutely furious, and yet you're somewhat part of that frustration is that you've got to wait until 2024 to vote for president again, or you have to wait to 2022 to vote your congressman in or out, depending on where they are politically. And so you're frustrated. You may be there, you may be talking back or throwing things at Fox Television as you watch some of their shows. And I came up with a thought last week, and here it is. The one thing that would absolutely shock all liberals, it would shock every member of the media, it would be if Gavin Newsom lost the recall in California and Larry Elder emerged as the next governor of California. A conservative, African-American radio talk show on this station and on a lot of Salem stations around the country. They're not telling me to say this, neither is Larry. It's all by myself. Because a lot of times people are so furious, they don't know a single thing to do. They have to be told specifically, what can I do to really make a difference? If every conservative in America wrote a $10 check just a $10 check, and sent it to Larry Elder in the next week or so, that amount of money, in my view, and by the way, the recent polls suggest that Larry Elder is on the cusp of being a Republican elected in the most democratic, progressive state in the union. This is within the realm of possibility. So if he woke up one day and he had $20 or $30 million extra to pour into money, the reaction from the Democratic establishment, can you imagine Speaker Pelosi? Can you imagine the president? Can you imagine any media person, anyone that's on the major networks? Martha Raddatz, can you imagine her responding or reacting?
Yeah, it'd be
Larry
just like
Elder,
it'd be just like when Trump won.
yes,
It would be
only I think it would even be tenfold, because it would be in the most progressive state. It would throw out a progressive governor who many people, including Democrats, think has done a horrible job. This is about inefficiency. That's why so many people want to get rid of him. I mean, I don't think you don't have to create reasons why people may want to get rid of the governor. So you vote no, you don't want the governor returned, and then you've got one other choice. You've got about 32 Republicans that are running. The only one that appears to be doing well at the moment, or literally on the cusp, is Larry Elder. So if you're a conservative,
yes,
send Larry Elder $10 tonight. If you want to send him more, go ahead.
And in the wake of all of what's happening in Afghanistan, what are the top Democrats doing? They're going to California to campaign for Gavin Newsom,
to save him,
rather than keeping their eye on the ball and extracting our Americans who are in harm's way in Afghanistan. It is despicable.
But that's
One
not
thing
just a
that-
Democratic
no,
thing.
no,
That Republicans are no better.
You don't do
They
this
are
when you
all,
are in crisis.
we talked
Oh,
about this
my
earlier in the
heavens.
show.
Kamala Harris going
Politicians
there?
always
Oh, my
do
gosh.
that. They always put fundraising. There's political
and
propaganda
if a
on
Republican
both sides.
were doing this, I would be bashing them just as much.
And
You gotta-
likewise, I don't
and-
agree
and,
with
the
this
one
either.
thing
But to say
Rush
that
and
it's
I
democratic,
could agree
come on.
though, the one thing Rush and I will agree on is that money matters in a race. And money
it
does help
matters
kids
a
with
lot,
your
but
message.
it's both ways that it matters. And if
Well,
we
Larry
can,
Elder's
obviously,
way outspent at
and
this
a
point.
couple of million people sending $10
Yes, would make a
in the
difference.
closing weeks
well,
or days of the
I'm
campaign.
going to hold off on the
Yeah, I
donation.
know you're going
right
to
here.
hold
I'm
on
just
that,
saying,
but I'm just saying is,
you know.
again, if you
Jeannie-
want to...
Maybe one
Jeannie- I
other,
see
maybe
Jeannie
one
on
other
the-
solution could
Jeannie's
be put
doing
in
a
the mix here
donation
too.
right now.
I'm right now, I'm on
Reverend
mine.
Draper,
The
wait,
people
Reverend
who are
Draper,
hurt by
Reverend
what's
Draper,
happened.
go ahead, go ahead, Reverend.
All of the people
your
that
pitch.
we're trying to work with to come to this country, maybe people could be stepping in to help in that in some way too, because this
Yes.
is a mess of our making, and these are people whose lives have been totally destroyed and are starting life all over again because of our actions. So what can we do to help them? I think that's also I know this is a political discussion and you guys are in the midst of it, but I don't
No.
want us to lose sight of
Reverend
No,
what
no,
we
Draper,
you're
care
though,
about.
absolute- by the
you're
way-
100%
victimized by
right.
what's going on.
And
I
by
will
the
tell
way,
you-
I would say send an extra $10 or $20 to World Relief as
There
well.
we go.
Because everyone, you don't have to be a Republican, a Democrat, and that's for everybody. If we really want to help these refugees coming back, we can do it. And by golly, if we end up with an African American conservative Republican governor of New York, that will get everybody's attention.
Additionally, Reverend Draper did not go into the finances, but it's my understanding that you only actually have enough funds to help these refugees out for a finite amount of time, and it's only a few months, and then they are expected to get a job and start to work on their own. And at the same time, though, we are supporting them. The school systems are very good about making sure that these refugees get a good start, and they take special care with them to integrate them into the society.
But again, they have so much to learn on
That's
that
why
first.
public
right.
partnership's really helpful, though, because we certainly do have public dollars that are limited toward this, but
Limited.
we have private dollars from donors and churches and individuals who really support what we do, and that's what makes it possible to do longer than those few months. And most of what we look at are the milestones, not the timelines, like helping them get to a place of sufficiency, moving from just surviving to thriving in their work. And people give not only financially, they give in kind. I mean, we have people who give gift cards, certainly housing, helping people find housing. They pay their own housing costs, but What do we do to furnish that? So household goods are a great need. Volunteers who will help with getting people from airports and setting up those apartments. People who would be willing to help tutor in English. All of those things, although these SIVs would probably not need that care, these are some of the basic things that we provide for families that are arriving.
And again, if people want to contribute there, they can go to World Relief. They can definitely find that on the internet. World Relief, they can make a contribution for a very important issue. It's going to be around a long time. We could be talking about this virtually every week in the future. We will periodically, but not every week. I'm Bruce DuMont. Good night.